Hi everyone, welcome to my Parsha Shir. This week we're not talking about the Parsha actually, we're going to be talking about Purim. That's that time of year, it's after Chodesh Adar. In anticipation of Purim, we're going to be talking about this, the most amazing of all the festivals of the Jewish calendar year, and that's really what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be discussing what makes Purim so unique. Why is it so different? You know, Shabbos, Yom Tov, I know that on Pesach we eat Matzah, and on Sukkot we say Sukkah. Shavuos, not quite sure, maybe we're going to talk about cheesecake. Shabbos is Shabbos, whatever it is. But essentially, they're interchangeable in a sense, right? Because we just sit down to a Yom Tov meal, we go to shul, and the differences between Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, Simchas Torah, not that big. Shabbos, really almost the same. Purim is just completely different. It's just the celebration part of Purim, the way we celebrate Purim is completely different. Nobody gives Shlachmonos on Rosh Hashanah. By the way, when Ezra and Nehemiah came back to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel, and they told people that they have to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, guess what they told them to do, or what the people did? They gave Shlachmonos. That's interesting. I guess that they had Purim on their mind. But in a sense, Purim is completely different. The way that we celebrate Purim is totally and utterly different than any other Yom Tov. We get dressed up in weird clothes, and we drink alcohol, and there's a sort of joyous element, a wanton joyous element to Purim that is not reflected in any other holy day of the Jewish calendar year. That's what I want to focus on today. I think it's an important topic because it clearly has spiritual connotations that stretch back to the dawn of its history, and we really need to understand it in order to celebrate Purim properly. And that's what we would like to do, right? We would like to celebrate Purim properly. I'm going to start with a Mishnah. The Mishnah is in Perek Beis of Maseches Megilla, and you can find it in Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph in the Gemara in Megilla. And the Mishnah says as follows: Hakores Megilla lemafreya lo yotza. You hear that? If someone reads the Megillah out of order, by the way, if you're looking for the source sheet, please refer to the comments section or the chat section of your Zoom, or the comment section on YouTube or on SoundCloud, or if you're on the website rabbidunner.com, you can just click on the link and it will download the source sheet for you, and you can refer to it. Everything that I'm going to say today can be found in the source sheet, and you can use it because the Torah I teach, I want you to teach. I want you to share it. I want you to become ambassadors of Torah, ambassadors for the celebration of Purim. I want you to take the messages I'm teaching you today, and I want you to teach it to others because they're really important, not just this week, every week. All the messages and the Divrei Torah that I share with you are messages that I would like you to share. There's no greater joy for a teacher than when one of his students becomes a teacher, because that means they've absorbed the message to the extent that they feel that they can share it in such a way that they themselves have students, that they themselves, and perhaps those students will also become teachers. So it's a gift that keeps on giving. It's my shlachmonos to you, and please give it to someone else. So the Mishnah says, Hakores ha-Megillah lemafreya lo yotza. Somebody reading the Megillah. If you go to shul, somebody's reading the Megillah, and he reads it out of order. He reads Perek Beis before he reads Perek Aleph. Instead of starting by Hibi Me'ach HaShverosh, he starts with the second Perek of the Megillah. Are you Yotzer? Is that good enough? Says the Mishnah, no, you can't read a later section first and then go back and read an earlier section of the Megillah. You've not fulfilled, you've not discharged your obligation. I'm going to read the rest of the Mishnah. If we're already going to learn a Mishnah, let's learn the whole thing. Kara al peh, Kara targum b'chol lashon lo yotza. If you read the Megillah by heart, that means you're very clever. You knew how to learn it by heart. By the way, we don't know anything by heart anymore. In the old days, it was very important to learn things by heart. Do you know why? because they didn't have texts. They didn't have something to read. Before the advent of the printing press, anything that was on a piece of paper or parchment or vellum had to be handwritten. Even when books first began to be published, they were expensive. Paper was expensive. The printing process was expensive. Today, you don't even need to print something in order to have it available for you to read. You can just look at it on your computer or on your phone. And that's why when I was a kid, we all remembered phone numbers. We didn't necessarily have a phone book to look at, so we remembered phone numbers. Today we don't need to remember anything. Everything is recorded. All you need to do is press a preset name, and the number doesn't need to be remembered. But and we had to know things by heart in those days, whereas we don't need to know things by heart today. So says the Mishnah, if you know the Megillah by heart, and you say the Megillah by heart on Purim, it's not good enough. Lo yotza. You've not been yotza. Targum. If you read it in Aramaic, in a foreign language, translation, any translation of the Megillah, not in its original biblical Hebrew, he has not fulfilled his obligation. That's not something that works in terms of discharging your duty in terms of the Megillah. Says the Mishnah, however, Aval Korin Oisa Leloyazois Belaz Vahaloyes Sheshoma Ashuris Yotza. So we have two exceptions to the rule that I've just enunciated, which is in the Mishnah. The first is that if you read the Megillah in a foreign language to people who understand it profoundly, so you understand English and the people you're reading it to understand English, and it's been translated perfectly, so that's one caveat which offers a little bit of grey area, because how do you translate something perfectly? No language can be perfectly translated, and particularly the Megillah, which has words which the Gemara mentions which don't lend themselves to easy translation. We may understand what they mean, but they can't be easily translated. But if it was possible to have a perfect translation in a language that the audience who's listening to the Megillah understands, Yotza, then the reading of the Megillah would work. And finally, and this is what's important for us, ultimately, because many people who listen to the Megillah don't understand what's referred to here in the Mishnah as Ashuris, which is the original biblical Hebrew. They don't understand biblical Hebrew. And it's read to them, and they just, maybe they can read Hebrew and they can follow it in the text, but they don't really understand it. How can they be Yotze? They don't know what's going on. The whole point of the Megillah reading is that they should know what's going on. They should understand the story. It's about Pirsum Nissa, about spreading news of this great miracle that occurred in ancient Persia. But they don't understand it. Says the Mishnah, notwithstanding that, Yotza, they are Yotze. They have discharged their duty, because the sacred language of Hebrew in which the Megillah was written is sufficiently holy to penetrate the souls even of those who don't necessarily at the surface understand the Hebrew in which it is written, in which it's being read. Okay, that's the Mishnah. I'm going to focus back on the first phrase of the Mishnah, Hakoires Megillah Lemafreya Yotza. The simple meaning of that statement, of Chazal's statement, Hakores Megillah Mafreya Yotza, is that whoever reads the Megillah in the wrong order hasn't discharged their duty in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Kores Megillah. Makes a lot of sense. That's what the Mishnah says. But the Nesivos Sholom, and we're going to look quite a bit at the Nesivos Sholom today. You know that Nesivos Sholom is one of my favorites. Nesivos Sholom quotes a fascinating piece from Rabbi Baruch of Mezhibush. Rabbi Baruch of Mezhibush was the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, a brother of the Degel Machane Ephraim, who is of course an ancestor of my wife Sabine, and an uncle of Reb Nachman of Breslov. He was the Rav and the Rebbe in Mezhibush, which is where the Baal Shem Tov had lived and acted. He died in the early, I'm not sure if it was the late 1700s or early 1800s. I believe it was the early 1800s. In fact, he didn't get on very well with Reb Nachman of Breslov, but he had a very large following, and he was a first-class example of a Chassidish Rebbe of that era, thinking out of the box, not saying the type of thing that rabbis always said as far as drush, as far as homiletic explanations of text that had been traditional up until that time. He just said things which he felt were messages contained in text, which were important for his audience, and he would find a way of deriving those messages from the text. Listen to what he said. It's fascinating. So the fascinating piece from Rabbi Mejibush turns this entire statement of Chazal, of Hakohes and Megilla Lemafrei Yotza, on its head, and it's in a way that only a Hasidic Rebbe could do that. Of course, I have to make this very clear, because you might think that when you hear what Rabbi Mejibush said, that he somehow dismissed the halachic implications of what the Mishnah is talking about. That's not the case at all. Rabbi Mejibush understood that when Chazal said something in a particular way, they had a very specific meaning in terms of halacha, but that also it was said in such a way that could be interpreted in a drush fashion, and he wants to convey that drush, he wants to draw meaning out of the wording, the verbiage of Chazal, so that we can have another lesson that's not halachic, but is nonetheless extremely important. It's the type of phraseology. This is what Rabbi Mejibush wants to say. It's the type of phraseology that lends itself to an alternative meaning that has a powerful lesson for Jews in every era and in every geographic location. Look at source number 3 in your source sheet. It's taken from the Nesivos Sholom. Motzinu b'Chazal. We find in Chazal, the sages of the Talmud of the Sifrei Tzadikim, and in the books of the great and righteous rabbis who have written over Jewish history, that they've been fascinated, they've been drawn to the fact that Megillas Esther is an elevated text, to the extent that it's more elevated than any other text in Tanakh. Shekula soidos nisgovim hashayochim leklolis Yisrael v'hashayochim lekol prat. Every aspect of the Megillah, which seems like a mundane, almost fairy story, like a fictional story that happens to be a true story, but it's expressed in this very dramatic fashion. It is a dramatic story. Nevertheless, it contains great secrets of a spiritual nature, of a mystical nature. And each and every aspect of the story contains very important messages for us to learn that you wouldn't get if you read the story. It's a nice story to read, like if you'd read a storybook. If you want to enjoy a bit of literature, you could read Megillas Esther, and it's a beautiful piece of literature. You could enjoy it on that basis. But there's something much more. There's much deeper meanings to everything that's contained in Megillas Esther. Umuva b'Beis Abraham, and the Beis Abraham says, "Shetzadikim roim b'Megillah kol me'urois heina b'chol ha'olam." Unbelievable. Every aspect of every thing that has ever occurred in this world somehow can be found in aspects of Megillas Esther. It's like a condensed essence. It's something which is the essence of history itself, not just Jewish history, of history itself. Every aspect of humankind, of human history, of everything that's ever happened to human beings throughout history can be found somewhere in the Megillah. V'Arav HaKodesh Baruch Mejibush, and here he quotes this piece that I've already introduced. The Baruch Mejibush says as follows: Omar b'Feirish Mamar Chazal HaKoire Es HaMegillah Lemafrei Yotze. He says, in order to explain or to understand or to have another alternative understanding of this phrase, HaKoire Es HaMegillah Lemafrei Yotze, somebody who reads the Megillah out of order hasn't been Yotze. What does the word Lemafreya generally mean? Do you know what the word Lemafreya means in Hebrew? It means in the past. Something that happened then, not now. Something that happened then. If you say something happened Lemafreya, it happened at some point in the past. He says, "Hakores HaMegillah Lemafreya Leyotza." Do you know what it means? If you think that this story of the Megillah is something that happened before, if you think it's something that didn't happen now, but something that happened at some point in the past, the distant past, very often you read these stories and you think, oh, it's wonderful history. Isn't that fascinating? But it's got nothing to do with right now. I mean, of course, now is totally different. Now we live in an era which is contemporary, and that's a history book story. Hakores HaMegillah Lemafreya Lo Yotza, says the Baruch Mejibush. If you read the Megillah and you think it's Lemafreya, Milifnim, it's something that happened before, lo yotza. You didn't understand the Megillah. You didn't understand that it affects and speaks to events that are happening right now where you are to you. Can you imagine that? Hakoyes Megillah lemafreya lo yotza. That's what it means. That's what Chazal meant. Ki gechol doyer v'shana tzarich lahargish keilu ze over achshav. At every point in human history, right now, wherever you are, whatever year it is, you need to imagine that the Megillas Esther story is a story that is occurring right at this very moment. Similar in a sense to this idea on Seder night, that we have to imagine as if we ourselves came out of Egypt. But that is because we need to relive that story in order to have a sense of our Jewish nationhood and our Jewish spiritual identity. But this is something slightly different. It's a similar idea, but it's slightly different. It's telling us that Megillas Esther is not a Lemafreya story. Read it as if it's happening now. Change the names, change the locations, change some aspects of the story perhaps. But in essence, there is always people who are plotting to destroy and be destructive and undermine and use money and use wealth and use influence and use whatever power, whatever they have, in order to have a benign impact on the world around them. They are Haman, and then there's an Esther, a Queen Esther, Esther Hamalka, there's a Mordechai, there's always an Achashverosh. All these characters, all these elements of the story that you think happened then in Persia are things that are happening right now. That's what Rabbi Baruch Mezhibush says. If somebody is reading the Megillah as if it's Lemafreya, it's a history story, lo yotza. He didn't get it, and therefore he cannot discharge his duty that way. Says the Nesivos Sholom. Why is Purim superior? Why do we have this idea that the Megillah is a superior text? Why do we have this idea that Purim is so important? Listen to what he has to say. Fascinating. Source number 4 in your source sheet. Harambam beperik beis b'mehilchas Megillah. Rambam in the 2nd chapter of his halachas about Purim. Kosav shekol sifrei hanavim v'chol haksuvim asidim libotel l'moisa Mashiach. He says that when it comes to the Messianic era, all the books of Tanakh will be obliterated, will be not important. I mean, of course, they'll still exist, but they won't be sanctified in the same sense as they are right now. Chutz mi Megillas Esther. There's one exception to that rule. Megillas Esther, the scroll of Esther, the story of this ancient liberation from certain death, from a Holocaust in ancient Persia, through the medium of Esther Mordechai against the wicked, evil Haman. That story will survive through the Messianic era, will be considered a holy text even when Mashiach comes. Just like the 5 books of the Torah, which are, of course, the Torah is the essence of Judaism. The rest of Tanakh will be, I don't want to use the word discarded, but you get the sense that it won't have the same relevance anymore. But one book will be an exception, and that is Megillas Esther. And just like, says the Rambam, the oral Torah, all the halachas that explain and augment Torah knowledge, through the Talmud we have them, just like they won't be discarded when Mashiach comes, so too Megillas Esther. And he doesn't really explain himself. Megillas Esther will not be discarded, will not be done away with when Mashiach comes. But the rest of Tanakh, let's call it Nevi'im, Ksuvim, Nach, that won't be as important. They won't be taken as seriously. Dargas Megillas Esther, hi lemala min Nevi'im Ksuvim. It seems that Megillas Esther is considered holier, more elevated, more special, more unique than every other book in Nevi'im and Ksuvim. We need to really understand. I mean, obviously, we don't have a crystal ball. We're not the Rambam. We're not the great spiritual mentors of Klal Yisrael, but nevertheless, says the Nesivos Sholom, Sholom Noach Berezovsky of Slonim, he's trying to say, and of course he was a very great man, he says, but based on our limited knowledge, our limited understanding, we still need to understand. Why is it so important to treat the Megillah with such reverence? What is it about the Megillah that makes it so special? Let's see if we can find what we call in Yiddish, Hebrew, a mahalach, some way of understanding as to what it is about the Megillah that makes it so special. We find in the holy books, it's not just Megillas Esther which is considered special, as the Rambam said. By the way, it's based on a Chazal, but it's not just Megillas Esther which is considered so special. Actually, Purim itself, the day of Purim, this concept of Purim, whatever it is that underlines and is the foundation of this festival, is considered very, very, very holy. The Aptarov, Avram Yeshua Heschel of Apatov, the Aptar Rebbe, one of the earliest of the Hasidic masters in Poland, a very, very great man. He wrote a book called Oyev Yisrael, the lover of Israel. That's what he was. He loved every Jew so much. And he writes about Purim, these are his holy words. They knew what they were talking about, Chazal, when they spoke about Purim, that it is as important, as special, as elevated as Yom Kippur itself. Can you imagine that? To compare Purim to Yom Kippur? But they said Yom Kippurim. Do you know what Yom Kippur is? It's the day that's like Purim. Purim is more special. What do we do on Purim? We eat, we drink, we have a fun time. What do we do on Yom Kippur? Yom Kippurim? What do? We fast, we're miserable, we stand in shul all day, we're doing tshuva. How can you compare the two? How can you say that Yom Kippur is like Purim? Surely, if Yom Kippur was like Purim, we'd all be drinking and reveling and giving shlachmonos, right? But that's not what we're doing. We're sitting in shul with a kittel on and davening and fasting. So how is it? And yet, that's what the Svarim HaKadoshim said. That's what the book said. They said that Purim and Yom Kippur have a lot in common. They have a commonality. And that means to say that it is a very special and holy day of the calendar year. And the Medrash actually says it. All the festivals will be done away with. They won't be irrelevant anymore. In Yemais HaMashiach, V'yemei Purim lo yihu betelim nivtolim le'olam. But the days of Purim will never be done away with. They will never be abandoned, ever, even after Mashiach comes. I'm not sure what that means, and I don't want to tell you that I know what that means. So I have no sense of it. But the Medrash does say it. The Medrash says that at some point after Mashiach comes, there won't be the festivals. To what extent the halachas of the festivals won't be relevant, I don't know. But what I do know is that the Medrash is very clear about Purim. Purim will remain. It will remain in place. It's very important. So important that it can never be abandoned. It can never be cut out of the calendar. That's what it says in the Medrash. Ma ro'u al kocha lahagdil begoidel erach yom hapurim yosim mikol hamoedim. Says the Nesivos Sholom. How is it possible that this Yom Tov of Purim will remain and all the other moedim, whatever that may mean, are not going to remain? How is it possible that Purim is considered to be more important than Pesach? How is it possible that Purim is considered more important than Shavuos, than Sukkot, than Shmini Atzeres? What are you talking about? Why would we even suggest that? Why would the Medrash say it? And yet it says it. So Purim must have something very unique, something very special, something very important. And let's try and get to the bottom of that today. Let's see if we can find some way of understanding it. The Nesivos Sholom now says that he wants to talk about the unique aspect of Purim that is not a part of any of the other festivals, and he does so through trying to explore this idea that every festival has something to offer the Jew who celebrates it and who observes it. Gam yesh lesamek b'mhus avodas hayom. We need to understand, what is it that we're doing on Purim that's so unique and so special, that it defines the Yom Tov, it defines this festival day, to the exclusion of any other day in the Jewish calendar year. Kiyodua, it's well known. Shelachol chag yesh inyan skuli meyuchad lekol asher kirvas Elokim yichafetz. Let's be clear. Every Yom Tov, and you've heard me give a shir on Pesach, about Pesach, not on Pesach. You've heard me give a shir about Shavuos, you've heard me give a shir about Sukkot, about Simchas Torah, about Chanukah, about every Yom Tov, about every special day in the Jewish calendar year. And we know that there are unique aspects of those calendar days, of those Yomim Tovim, that we can get close to Hashem by doing a particular thing. So, for example, I'll just give you one example, because the next Yom Tov after Purim is Pesach. There is a special aspect of Pesach called eating matzah. And by eating matzah, we're going to have a special relationship with Hashem through eating matzah, or by not eating chometz, by making sure that our house is chometz free. And we didn't eat chometz. That's what he calls here the inyan seguli meyuchad, the very unique aspect, definition of this festival that enables us to come close to Hashem, which is something that we want. So somehow we couldn't do that on Erev Pesach. We can't do it on Motzei Pesach. I couldn't do it today. If I ate matzah today, it wouldn't help me. It's not going to bring me close to Hashem in the same way as if I eat matzah on Pesach. So that's the unique aspect of Pesach, right? Shehu eis rotzein u'she'as ha'koishe le'inyan mesuyam she'efsher lahasigoy dafka bizman hazeh. This opportunity only offers itself to the Jew who observes it on that particular day. And if you eat matzah on any other day, you could say, listen, I can't celebrate Pesach this year on the week that it's Pesach. Listen, come on. I mean, usually Pesach's in the middle of April. This year it starts at the beginning of March. I'll tell you what, I'm going to do Seder the same day as I did Seder last year. Come on, I need that. Last week of March is really important. I need that time. I'm going to celebrate Pesach a week later. I'm going to do 100% problem. I'm going to clean my house of chometz. I'm going to have Seder night a week later. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to wear my kittel. I'm going to have a Seder plate. I'm going to have morah. I'm going to have matzah. I'm going to have charosis. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to sing Dayenu 100 times. Does it work? Can it work? Can't work. Why? Because it's only mesugal to that particular zman. The fact that you ate matzah on Pesach has a specific ability to elevate your connection to Hashem, to bring you closer to Hashem. Okay, so we understand that. And that's, in the words of the Nesivos Sholom, is kiyodua. It's well known, it's self-understood. Okay, so now we know that to be true. We've proven that to be the case. How do we explain Purim? What is it about Purim that's special, that connects us to Hashem? V'alidei mishteh v'simcha, right? I'll tell you how. Because the mitzvahs of the day are drinking and having a wonderful feast and having a good time. B'yesh lahavin b'sumei ad yoda. So there's a v'leb'sumei ad yoda, and then there's this idea that you need to get drunk until you're completely clueless about what's going on around you. There's no other festival. Are you ever told to get drunk on Shabbos? I know that there's such a thing as a Kiddush club in shuls, and people sneak out during Haftarah, and they go and have a bit of whiskey. I said once in my shul that there's something much more exclusive in my shul than the Kiddush club. You know what it's called? It's called the Haftara Club. The people who stay inside and they listen to the Haftarah, that's in a more exclusive club. People go out and they have a bit of a drink. Okay, but that's not part of your Shabbos obligations. People want to feel good on Shabbos. They want to have a drink or two of whiskey. I understand. On Purim, it's an expectation. So you're going to say, what do we have to do on Seder night? We have to drink 4 cups of wine. You have to drink 4 cups of wine. But the halacha says that if you're going to get shikah from the wine, it's no good. And you have to dilute it a bit. You have to make sure maybe there's a bit of grape juice in it. And there's some people who don't have a tolerance for alcohol. You don't have to drink alcohol on Pesach night if you have no tolerance for it. But the Gemara says, it's clear, it's a Gemara Megilla. Chai v'nish lebesume ad lo yada. It's a song. Chai v'nish lebesume. You'll hear it on Purim. You have to get shik on Purim. You have to drink. You have to get tipsy on Purim. It's part of the avodas hayom. How does that make sense? How does it make sense to include as part of the avodas hayom that somebody has to get shikah, that somebody has to lose his faculties? What's the point in it? But that's the halacha. Another thing you have to do is you have to give gifts of food to your friends. We mentioned it earlier. Do you have to give gift of food to your friends for Pesach? On the first day of Pesach, do you run around giving mishlach manos? No, you don't. In fact, in many communities, they won't eat mishlach manos from your house because they'll only eat in their own homes. They won't trust your food on Pesach. And yet on Purim, it's just a month before, you're running around from house to house, from home to home, from friend to friend, giving shlach manos out. How does that make sense? What is that about? You have a duty on Purim to give charity to the poor. Do you have such a duty on Pesach? Well, before Pesach, it's true. It says, and Chazal tell us, that we have to make sure that even an oni can have arba koisais, but not on Pesach itself. And it's not one of the mitzvahs of the day. It's you as a community have to have a tamchui, have to have a community fund that can ensure that people have what they need, that they have the wine, they have the matzah for Pesach, in order that they can discharge their duty, fulfill their obligations. But on Purim itself, you need to make sure that you've given matonos levyonim, you've given charity to the poor. You have to make sure that that's distributed on the day. So you've made the poor people, the people who are less fortunate than yourselves, happy. I have a fund that I collect money before Purim. People give hundreds, thousands of dollars before Purim, and I make sure it's distributed on the day of Purim, not a day before or a day later. I have an agreement with all the people who distribute the funds that I collect before Purim. And by the way, if you want to distribute to that fund, please email me, rabbi@yimbh.org, rabbi@yimbh.org. You can participate in this campaign. I guarantee you that the money will be distributed on Purim. Matonos le'evyonim is a mitzvah hayom. It's a mitzvah of the day. There's no other Yom Tov. Simchas Torah, you don't give charity to the poor. Shavuos, you don't give charity to the poor. On a regular Shabbos, you don't give charity to the Purim. One day in the year where we have been obligated. It's a mitzvah to give charity to the poor on that day, for that day, to bring joy to those who are less fortunate than you. Unbelievable. Matonos le'evyonim. So you see, all these obligations, they have no counterpart in any Yomim Tovim throughout the Jewish calendar year, but on Purim, they are required. She'ei mitzvahs ka'elu b'sha'ar chagim, that we don't have any mitzvahs like this in any of the other Yomim Tovim. V'chein yesh lahavin shaychus kol ha'mitzvahs ha'elu l'inyan meches ha'molek. And one other aspect that we really need to appreciate, we need to understand, is how exactly, let's remember what Purim is about. You know that Shabbos we're going to read Parshas Zohar, last 3 psukim in Parshas Kiseitze, in Dvarim, right? Timche zecha Amalek, wipe out the memory of Amalek. What's Purim about? We killed Haman, we killed his 10 sons. Timche zecha Amalek, this seems to be one of the aspects of Purim that you need to be engaged in. Mechias Amalek. Exactly how is Chayev Odom Lebesume Bepuria Adelo Yoda? What's that got to do with Mechias Amalek? I'm going to drink a lot of beer and whiskey and wine, and I'm going to get a bit chicker, and that way Timche Zecha Amalek. Really? You're going to go to the pub and have a beer, and that's going to be Timche Zecha Amalek? What's that got to do with Timche Zecha Amalek, Mechias Amalek? How is that relevant? Sheza Iker in Yonesh or Purim. That's one of the most important aspects of Purim. How are we serving that particular requirement with the mitzvah sayom, with matonos levyonim, with mishlach manos, with mishteh, with suda, and with adelo yoda? How is it possible that we've served that obligation? What have we done to make sure that Amalek will never reappear in our lives? Habir b'zeh, din kol hachagim hema yemei kedusha Let's remember, every Chag, every festival, every time we celebrate a special day, what we call a holy day, a Yom Tov, in the Jewish calendar, it's an opportunity for us to get closer to Hashem Yisbarach. Umatorosam asher yirah kol zuchurcha es pnei Hashem Elokecha. Its underlying motivation, its defining characteristic, is that we should get close to Hashem. We should be able to come face to face with Hashem. And so, although Chanukah and Purim were rabbinically obligated festivals, they have this same idea that through whatever it is that we do on these festivals, we should come closer to Hashem. Losi hadroga ha'ilois. The whole hadarga ha'ilois. The whole idea is that we should elevate ourselves to the next level. We should become more special. We should be able to be more spiritual, more connected to Hashem through that day. That's the purpose of Pesach, right? We sit down at Seder night, not so that we can eat matzah. It's not going to be our first choice of food. I know that lots of people like French roast and brisket that they're going to have on the Seder night, or boiled chicken, maybe not so much the boiled chicken. And there may be people who like chrein, and therefore they're going to enjoy eating moror, but that's not the reason. You wouldn't necessarily sit down on an evening together with your entire family and shove your face full of moror. And yet that's what we do. Why do we do it? Because we want to become closer to Hashem. That's why we're doing it. Somehow through that act, we are connecting ourselves to Hashem. We're in these days which are lit up, and where there's our moich is brain, but our intellectual capacities are increased. Everything about the day is elevating. It's elevating spiritually. It's elevating intellectually. It's elevating in a mystical sense, in ways that we don't understand. Somehow we are elevated through the Chagim. Even at a time when we may not be, in the best possible situation. And particularly last year, and I fear that this year, when it comes to Purim, hopefully not Pesach, we weren't necessarily in a situation where we could celebrate and be happy and be together with family. We were on our own. We were celebrating Pesach, at a time when it was very difficult. We weren't able to do it in the same ways we did it in the past. Or Purim. Last year, Purim, of course, many people did celebrate. But this year, Purim, people may be somewhat muted in their celebration. Yet, it offers us an opportunity of growth in our spirituality and our connectedness to God. That's the point of the festival. Hayoim hagodol b'yoyse b'shon hayoim haKippurim. If we're going to look at the calendar, if I'm going to ask anybody, I'm going to ask a kid in school, what's the most important day of the Jewish calendar year, the holiest day of the year? Everyone puts their hand up. Hello, teacher, choose me. I choose whichever kid it is. He's going to say, Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. Asher be'ez she'ola Moshe Rabbeinu el ahar ve'hisham arbaim yom, was the day that Moshe Rabbeinu went up on the mountain, second time. He was there for 40 days. Hayo yom haKippurim, yom ha'arbaim boy nis'ala ma'oid ad shekibal luchos achronos v'amar LaKadosh Baruch Hu salachti kidvarecha. He goes up on the mountain. It's Yom Kippur. And God gives him the second luchos. And God says to him, Salachti kidvarecha, I've forgiven the Jewish people, as you requested, as you required. It's the most special day of the year. There's nothing like Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is powerful. Yom Kippur, the Rambam says in Hilchos Tshuva, offers us an opportunity that no other day of the year offers us. We have an opportunity in Yom Kippur to do tshuva like on no other day of the year. You can't do it on Erev Yom Kippur. You can't do it on Matzah Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, we have this incredible opportunity, and we want to drag it on, and we have this tradition. We drag it on a bit till Hoshana Rabbah, and according to some, even all the way into the last day of Hanukkah. But ultimately, Yom Kippur, Everybody knows. Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. Solachti kidvarecha. Moshe Rabbeinu, Har Sinai. We get the second luchos. We get a second chance. There's no holier day, right? V'kach gam l'doros nikva l'yom his alus. Sha'kohen hagadol zoche b'pam achas b'shon likonis lifnai v'lifnim. Every generation since Moshe Rabbeinu, Solachti kidvarecha on Har Sinai. The Kohanim, that was the day where they went into the Kodesh Kodashim. They went into the Holy of Holiest. That was the time when they went Lifnai v'Lifnim leKodesh HaKodashim. K'mo shehikshu Chazal al HaPosik v'chol Adam la'yeh ba'el moed. Chazal ask a question, but surely, how is it possible that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, can go into the Kodesh Kodashim? How is he even allowed to go in there? How does he have permission? It says in the Pasuk, it's a Pasuk in the Torah that says that no Zar, no human being is allowed to set foot in the Kodesh Kodashim. And that the Kohen Gadol is instructed to go there on Yom Kippur. Do you know why? Harei Kohen Gadol hayasham ve'eno ela yilud isha. How is it possible? Ask Chazal. How is it possible that he goes in there if he was born of a woman, if he's a human being? Say Chazal that when the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, went in the Kodesh Kodashim, he's not considered human. He's elevated to the extent that he's no longer a human being. He's on a new level. He's like an angel. He's like, I don't know what he's like. He's just not you and me. He's not himself that he was yesterday and he's going to be tomorrow. He is a Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur in the Kodesh Kodashim, not a human being. And therefore he's allowed in, even though the Pasuk says that no person is allowed to be in the Ohel Moed. And yet he's allowed to go in because he is considered to be something beyond his human limitation. This is the highest level of elevation that a human being can be in. That's what a Kohen Gadol was on Yom Kippur. This is the holiest day, much holier than any of the other days, the festival days that we have. Shabbos, and we know that we treat it like Shabbos. Even though it's not Shabbos, by the way, sometimes it can be on Shabbos, but even if it's not on Shabbos, it's on another day of the week. We treat Yom Kippur like Shabbos. It has an elevated status. There's certain things that you can't do, even more than on a normal Shabbos. Shabbosoin, it's a double Shabbos. That's what Yom Kippur is. But in parallel to Yom Kippur, there's another day of the Jewish calendar year, Yom HaPurim, not Yom Kippurim, Yom HaPurim, the Purim day. On Purim, a person has the possibility, the ability to elevate themselves to the level that they could elevate themselves on Yom Kippur. It has the same power. Unbelievable. This is unbelievable. Yom Kippur's in the Torah, Shabbosoin. And yet we have a day which is rabbinically mandated called Purim, which has the same possibility of elevation in terms of spirituality, of us being able to be beyond our human limitations. It's called Purim. It's like Yom Kippur. And yet, we don't fast on Purim. It's exactly the opposite. All the obligations of Purim, if you could write a script, if you could put together a list of rules that were the total opposite of what you have to do on Yom Kippur, and for Yom Kippur, you'd write the rule book about Purim. That's what you would do. Because Purim is the exact opposite. It is the antithesis of Yom Kippur. Inyan HaPurim hu lehefech, shemis'ale mitoich hamatzah hayorud v'hashofel beyoysa shel hasheichim ve'inoiga loi v'hu betoich hester goda. Do you know why? It's a day in which we go to, as it were, the lowest level, the most physical, the most material behavior that we can find, and through that we elevate ourselves. We're not going into the Kodesh Kodashim. We're not bringing kabbonos. We're not fasting. We're not washing. We're not doing all the things that we do on Yom Kippur, davening in a shul all day, whatever it is, in order to become holy. We're doing the exact opposite. We're eating, we're drinking, we're giving presents, we're having a good time. Those are things we do on Purim, and yet through that we become elevated to the same level as Yom Kippur. It's the exact opposite, and yet it achieves the same result. Ukamamar Chazal, As Chazal have taught us, Esther min ha-Torah minayin. How do we know about Esther in the Torah? Because everything has a source in the Torah. You know that you can find everything in the Torah. You want to know about... I've just published a book. I'm not sure if it's available yet in your bookstores. It's called Hearts and Minds. It's 160 articles that I've written on every parsha in the Torah. I've written many more, but this is a book, 750 pages, and it's about every single subject you can imagine. It's about psychology, it's about politics, about diplomacy, it's about the United Nations, about Donald Trump, about Jeremy Corbyn, it's about philosophy, it's about theology, medicine, history, whatever subject you can imagine I've written on. Everything connected in the Torah with a source, a root in the Torah. I have found every single subject, a reference to it in the Torah in some way, shape or form. There is nothing that you can't find in the Torah. Say Chazal, Esther min ha-Torah minayin. How do we know that Esther is in the Torah? Where is the source, the root of Esther in the Torah? It's a pasuk. The pasuk says, Shenema va'onochi haster aster ponai b'yom hahu. I will hide my face, says God, on that day. The literary connection is haster aster, Esther. By the way, Esther wasn't her real name. Esther was her Persian name. But where do we know that that name has relevance in the Torah? V'anochi haster aster ponai b'yom hahu. Kol Megillas Esther inyona lahoros la'am Hashem eichlis alois v'liskadesh b'kedusha elyoina. The entire Megillas Esther is a guidebook for every member of the Am HaKodesh, for the holy nation, of those who subscribe to God, who believe in God, who know that God is in control. It is the almanac. It is the central authority for how to find God b'vchinas Yom Kippurim, at the level of Yom Kippur, mitoch matzav shel hester o yom, in a matzav, in a situation where God doesn't seem to exist, where God seems to be as far away as possible. I'm drinking whiskey and wine, and God is right there in front of me, next to me, in my life. Like Yom Kippur, v'anochi haster aster ponai b'yom hahu. God says, I'm hidden. I'm not even there. I'm right there. I'm right there, alongside you, with you. It's Purim. You're having a good time. Mishteh u'su'udah. Ad de lo yoda, until you know nothing. I'm right there with you. It may seem anochi haster aster ponai b'yom hahu, but actually I'm right there with you. I'm alongside you. Kamuva b'chazal b'sfarim hakadoshim. As Chazal teach us, and it's mentioned many times in the Sfarim that talk about Purim, that every single place where it says the word Hamelech, and it says it many, many times in the Megillah, Hakavona lemalchoi shel olam. The word Hamelech is not talking about Achashverosh. Actually, it's talking about Melech Malchei Hamlochim, the ultimate King of Kings, God Himself. Melech Malchei Hamlochim HaKodesh Baruch Hu, Ach Heyois V'chol Inyan HaMegillah Hu Hester Gam Zeh B'Hester. Just like every other aspect of the Megillah has something to tell us about the lives that we lead. But it's hidden. We need to find it. We need to look for it. We need to find that lesson. So too God is in every time it says Hamelech, that's God. But we need to find it, we need to recognize it, we need to embrace that idea that God can be found even where it seems He can't be found. In this book, which is the ultimate storybook of Tanakh, Megillas Esther, where God's name isn't mentioned, no Novi is mentioned, nothing. We don't even talk about it in that sense. It's talked about in a literary sense. It's a fantastic story, it's exciting, it's dramatic. We're not quite sure what the end is going to be. Of course, we know what the end is going to be. That's why we're celebrating Purim. But when the story was ongoing, if you're reading it for the first time, you don't know how this is going to end. It's a dramatic tale. It's a narrative. God is right there, even though He's never mentioned. Even though it doesn't seem apparent that He was involved in this story, He's deeply involved. Let's look at Tzadok Hacohen of Lublin. He wants to talk about our victory against Amalek. Let's think about the Gentile nations of the world. When they're eating, they're drinking, they're getting drunk. What do they talk about? The drunker they get, what do they talk about? They talk about the latest TV show, and they talk about, I'm sorry to say this, inappropriate subjects. They talk about, they tell dirty jokes, and they get more lewd and more inappropriate. The more they get drunk, the more they eat, the more they feel that feeling of drunkenness, the more loose their tongue becomes. That's what Rabbi Tzadok Hacohen says. He says, I've got the best proof for you. It's right there in the Megillah. Right at the beginning of the Megillah. What did Achashverosh do when he got drunk? He says, bring my wife Vashti naked to parade herself in front of all the men at the party. That's what he said. Like Russia. But why did he do it? Because he got drunk. Because he'd lost all control. He'd lost all his dignity. That's what happened. That's the very beginning of the Megillah. The whole Parsha of Haman began because Vashti didn't want to come. Therefore Vashti was banished. It was Haman who gave the advice, find a new queen. The whole thing came about as a result. Haman was elevated. Mordechai didn't like him, therefore Haman wanted to kill the Jewish people. It all started because of the drunkenness that took place at the party that Achashverosh had, where he'd called, because he was behaving inappropriately, he called for his wife to parade herself naked in front of the guests. The Seifei Haya B'Mishte de Esther. But what's the end of the Megillah? The end of the story of the Megillah, where the liberation came, the redemption came for the Jewish nation, was the Mishta of Esther. She also had a party. She had a party with Haman and Achashverosh. Now, we always imagine that it was just these three people sitting around a table. And that's not the way it happened. No king comes into a room where there's not something going on. King Achashverosh, Queen Esther, Haman, who's the most important person, he's the viceroy of Persia, are sitting there. Do you think there was no one else there? Of course there were people there. Imagine that if she's making a party for the king and for his most trusted advisor, she made a party as parties are for such people. She had all the types of entertainment that you can imagine that are appropriate for such a party, for such an important person. She had entertainers, she had music, she had waiters, she had everything was going on there. She had plenty. The bar wasn't one bar, there were 3 bars. But you got 3 people, you need 3 bars. That's the type of party that Esther made. And you can imagine if Esther was there, she couldn't sit there, tightly in her seat and just wait for something to happen. Part of the plan was that she had to participate in the party, and she did. She drank, she listened to the music, she got into conversations with them, she did whatever it took to show that she was partying alongside. This is what Tzadok says. Esther behaved in a party fashion together with Achashverosh and Haman until that moment of truth. But it didn't matter what she did, how much she partied, how much she drank, made no difference. Ultimately, she behaved like Esther Hamalka. That's who she was. Her closeness to God was not damaged or limited or in any way reduced or diminished as a result of her participating in that party. It was only because she took herself to that limit that she was zoiche to mechias Amalek, to eradicating Amalek, to obliterating Amalek. You need to go into his territory. You need to delve into his life form, as it were. Become almost like him, but not be like him. And be close to Hashem in that sphere. Ki Hashem Yisbarach himlich b'schoik sheyeh kuloi mitzad HaKedusha. Ultimately, the revelry, the partying that she participated in, that one can participate in, Hashem has control. And if you are close to Hashem, He can make sure that any such behavior that is inappropriate won't happen in a party that you're doing because of a Tzadok Kedusha. Because if your aspiration is to be close to Hashem, it doesn't matter how much you drink. If your relationship with Hashem is so strong that nothing that can be done will shake you from that faith, then you can drink as much as you like and eat as much as you like and be with whoever you like. Your faith in Hashem will just get stronger, won't get weaker. That's the power of Purim. The power of Esther's mishteh, of her feast that she had with Haman and Achashverosh. That she could take that feast with Vashti at the beginning of the Megilla and turn it on its head and undo everything that it had achieved. Because she was the same Esther Hamalka. She was the Kedusha and the Tahara of a Jewish woman, even in the midst of that revelry and that feasting and that drinking. And that's why Purim, which is like Yom Kippur, how do we celebrate it? Not by fasting, not by reducing our contact with the physical material world. The exact opposite. We have feasts on Purim, Sudas Purim, b'mishteh v'simcha levare shesimchas Yisrael dovuk b'kedusha, to demonstrate that the joy of a Jewish person, someone with deep faith in Hashem as a Jew, is through exactly that medium which in the Ummos HaOlam who don't believe in Hashem would lead them down the wrong path. It doesn't matter how many jokes and whether you can be dressed up and you can be having a good time and singing and dancing and all the things that you do, which we don't do in Yom Kippur, but you're doing it for Hashem. You're doing it because you want to get closer to Hashem. You never get drunk during the rest of the year. That's why Purim is so unique. It's to prove that even when you do, you're close to Hashem. But it's not something you do every day of the year. Of course you don't. That's not the way you behave. You don't have some secret party somewhere that you can have it every single day. You don't have a party every night with your friends. That's not the way, even on Yom Tov, that's not the way we behave. That's not the Jewish way, but we have one day where we do it to prove that when we do it, we do it l'shem shamayim. We do it because we want to have a relationship with Hashem. Everything that we do on that day on Purim is l'shem shamayim. And even though on that day we may get to a stage where we're very tipsy, even a little bit drunk, even beyond tipsy. Shehu b'tachlis ha'elam ve'ashikha. That's the time when you forget. When you're tipsy, your normal, ordinary, day-to-day faculties that keep you going and keep you on the straight and narrow, you forget them. You don't have those. You don't have control of yourself in the same way. Adayin lo nek hamidveikus b'kedusha. You don't in any way reduce yourself from the closeness to Hashem and the holiness that you would like to be close to. Afilu k'meloi neima v'me'achar shebi osei lidei shikha zu hainu lekavonas mitzvah l'shem shamayim. Even when you've forgotten everything, even when you're not in control of your faculties, it was l'shem shamayim, and therefore you're still close to Hashem. You know, the Gemara says, Chazal tell us that if you want to know who somebody really is, it's an alliteration. B'kisoi, b'koisoi, b'kasoi. Through their money, how they spend their money. B'koisoi, when they're drunk. Or b'kasoi, when they get very angry. You can know somebody. If you want to really know somebody, you'll know them when they get drunk. Purim is a window into somebody's real personality, into their genuine personality. And on Purim, when we let everything go, that's Mechias Amalek. That's when we are able to demonstrate that we have no Amalek in us. We're not Amalek. We believe in Hashem 100%. And by the way, if when you get drunk on Purim, you find yourself not doing it l'shem shamayim, you know that too. You know that perhaps there's some pagam. Perhaps you wouldn't be able to keep Yom Kippur properly and be in the Kodesh Kodoshim as the Kohen Gadol. Why? Because there's something in you which is not quite right. And Purim offers you the opportunity to examine yourself, to look at yourself in the mirror, even in that situation, that particular situation. And that is an opportunity that only comes once a year. And that's what makes Purim so special that we'll even celebrate it when Moshiach comes. That's what makes Megillas Esther so special, more special than all the other books of Nevi'im Kesuvim. That's indeed what makes Purim unique to the extent that it can be compared to the very holiest day of the Jewish calendar year, Yom Kippur. We'll leave it here for today.